everybody. Welcome to Role4Recap, where we kind of go over the episodes that happened before we started this channel. I will be your host today, Bright. I use she, they pronouns, and I am here with Gears, who is the dungeon master for this campaign, and Tony, who is a player in this campaign as well. How are you guys doing today?
Doing all right.
Doing great.
Wonderful. I'm glad to hear that. Well, before we get started, we're going to be going through the first arc of this campaign that we have. But first, we want to go over some of the world lore, where I'm going to pass that on to Gears. Gears, tell us about it.
So this is a world that I created several years ago before the first episode ever aired, before we got the group together. Working on it little bit by little bit, incorporating a lot of my favorite little special interests, starting with steampunk and then going to cyberpunk, then incorporating some eco-punk and industrial diesel punk. So the world has a little bit of everything. The economy is what dictated the growth of the direction of each of the worldviews, and how some of them stopped at a certain point, some of them keep evolving. There is Auroran, that is the highest up north city-state, and it is in a kind of in between a really, really high mountainous area, but also goes down to a coastal area, so it's very, I guess you could say, Northern Ireland-ish, where there's so many cliffs that meet the ocean, but they're able to make a way down into the shore to do some research and whatnot. They're very research and science focused, but we also have magic, and they're very eco-based, very highly developed area. Then we have, going down south, we have Wharfburg, which developed as a trade economy, textiles, and a lot of basic things, farm areas, food, animals, products, those sort of things, a workman's kind of thing, shoemakers and things like that, but also trade. They are kind of in a flat area, but also near a mountain area that they can also go mining for and get minerals and things like that, deposits as well. Further southwest, we have the city of Itheros. That is a very Nesla punk thing, where they have open arcs of electricity and arcana that's just everywhere. They have it open air. They decided that was the most efficient way to have both electricity and magic kind of available to everyone. They're mostly wearing grounding type of clothing, where it's mostly rubber and leather and such, but they're artists, they are inventors, they are researchers, but mostly they are creators and developing all sorts of neat little gadgets and technology. Further west, we have the city of Vorak, that is very communal-based. It's very religious-focused and spiritual. They have a lot of rolling hills, a lot of deep forests, and almost swamp-like areas where people or groups of clergy can focus their worship to either nature or gods or just each other in community. And then we have up north from them is Loyaltis, which is more kind of a police-focused government area. They are kind of a retro 50s atom punk kind of sort of area, but they're very also militarized in their looks and their appearances. It is also the state that has the most prisons, and then the really, really harsh structure in that. And then last but not least, there is the city-state of Lulhall, which is very bureaucratic. High, tall structure buildings, very downtown-ish, where you've got just buildings of glass and just tall structures. Everyone's in suits of some sort, business attire, gray, black, white, and they deal with a lot of bureaucratic stuff: taxes, lawmaking, copyright, patents, suing, and each city state, of course, has their own micro little areas that they need, because everyone needs food, everyone needs something, but these are the areas that they specialize.
Mhm.
And that is the world that these characters that we're about to about are kind of in. It's a world of both science and magic.
Wonderful. And then, kind of speaking of those characters, Tony, would you explain who the cast and crew is?
Absolutely. For this arc, we've got six main cast characters. We're going to start with Baldric because early on in the storyline, Baldric's very important. I know we'll get to that in a minute. Baldric is a warforged butler type, wearing the sort of penguin suit and top hat, who has escaped from a very rich family named the Astor family, where he started out as a butler and then he was actually turned into a prize fighter. And at the beginning of the show, he's escaped and they're on the hunt for him. So he's on the run. We have Boston, who is a human bounty hunter and ex-convict, a paladin of Lythander, and really like this noir type detective character. Wearing this like dingy suit with a yellow button up underneath, and there's always cigarettes tucked in his pocket because he's a chain smoker.
Hmm.
He sort of runs around with a shotgun, because that's his approach to problems, right? We've also
Yeah.
got Nash, who I play. Nash is a half orc who was an ex-fighter turned ex-convict who now is getting into bounty hunting with Boston because they were locked up together in prison. And Boston sort of set Nash on this idea of the Church of Lythander and its focus on redemption. And Nash, being the good boy that he is, and who is always wearing a tank top and like booty shorts, the best workout gear, of course, and light up sneaks. Um, Nash focuses in on this idea of being better and fixing his past wrongs, the wrongs that put him in prison. And so he follows Boston in exploring that. Then we have Ramita, our grandma halfling who loves to wear her classic spiked leather jacket. Literally, it's a leather jacket that when she activates it, it gets spikes like a hedgehog, right? Or like a
Hmm.
porcupine. Um, and she also has she's also an ex-fighter as well, with a drinking problem and a penchant for butterscotch candies. And then we have Fenrana, our Asimar governmental investigator from Auroran. And they're called a Lumen, which is a big organization that investigates other city states and makes sure they're doing the right things. And spent years studying up to that. They're proper and by the book type usually, and almost always wearing these sort of layered academic robes. So that's a really quick overview of our characters. I know they're more intense usually than that, but a lot of that will come out as you learn more about them.
Hmm. I will say Fenrana is actually a Kalishtar, is what their race is.
That's what it was. That's okay.
Yes.
I wrote Asimar,
I
but
saw that right as you
Oh,
said it, and I was like, oh
it's
no.
okay. Excuse me. They're a Kalashtar or Kalashtar. We've never known how to
Kalishtar.
say it.
no one knows
Kalashtar.
how to say.
I know how to say it because I love that. I love that race. It's an amazing race.
My brain
Um,
also went like, yeah, that's right. I totally missed that.
I was like, that's the one thing that I've always remembered about Fenrana besides like that and what class they are. I was just like, they're Kalishtar. No one knows it yet.
Mhm.
Ah, and I'm just like, oh, it's so cool. It's one of my favorite classes to play in D&D, and I rarely ever get to play it. Um,
I feel like I have to
but
be your friend in this way and tell you it's a race, not a class, but that's okay.
Is that what I said? I'm so sorry.
We're all making mistakes. That's fine.
We're
It's
all
great.
doing it. It's good. Welcome to breaking character.
Very much.
But yeah, so that is who we've got. And so now we're kind of just going to go over the general summary. So in this arc, Boston, Nash, Baldric, Nova, and Edward meet because Baldric is on the run due to a bounty being on their head. Despite Boston being a bounty hunter, or also known as a cowboy in this universe, the group decides to head to the Church of Lathander to find sanctuary. Overnight, the church is bombed, and Edward and Nova unfortunately pass away. Boston, Nash, and Baldric meet Ramita and Fenrana in the aftermath and begin investigating the explosion and the reasons why. They uncover the mysterious church called the Church of the Dawn and attend a sermon where children seem to be energized by glowing chairs. Stay with me. The party decides to investigate further, discovering a hidden room behind a curtain with a teleportation circle. Rick and Boston use the circle, finding themselves in a room used for melting down magical artifacts. They set off an alarm, leading to chaos in a large factory-like building and having to flee. To continue on, the party continues their investigation into the mysterious cult and the kidnapped children. They explore an abandoned school, encountering traps and Sentinel, thank you. A Sentinel drone. After defeating said drone, they find a hidden chamber with tubes containing children of various states of development. The party defeats cultists in the area and captures 2 of them. Then the police arrive, and during the interrogations, they learn more about this cult, including the names of the higher-ups. They also discover that some of the children possess unique abilities, like fire manipulation and precognition. As they piece together the puzzle, they notice a girl disappearing mysteriously, to which Nash chases after her, but she vanishes. The group is left with more questions, and the cult's reach seems to extend further than they initially thought.
You know, it's wild that I know that this is a 12-episode recap, but that was a lot, and I was there for it, and I forget that until we say it out loud. That's wild.
Yeah, it's a lot.
And as a longtime viewer, I forgot a majority of that, and so reading that summary is very like, oh my gosh, they really went through it. Like, you know, like, and in context, like 12 episodes that, and they play once a week. That's 3 months of going through this as people. So it's very interesting to see when in reality, I think this whole arc took a week in game.
Yeah.
A week or two.
Yeah.
I think this first bit of the arc was even like 4 days. For maybe 5
even
days.
less than that, because they didn't even talk about leaving until a couple of days after.
Yeah. So, you know, D&D time relative to real time is whack. It is absolutely wild. But I guess, Gears, would you go over the pilot, the first episode with us?
Sure. In the bustling town of Ithros, Ithros, the party, including Boston, Edward, Nova, Nash, and Baldric, also known as Rick, explores the presence of a valuable item held by a Warforged butler. They delve into discussions about morality, Rick's troubled past involving bot fighting orchestrated by a problematic Estor brother, and the decision to hide a valuable ring in a pill cap. As they embark on a journey to Vorak, tensions rise at the Temple of Lathander, but they find sanctuary under the guidance of Tobias, who reveals the ring's worth and offers Rick a place for closure. Personal moments unfold during the night, hinting at deeper, darker character developments, leaving room for the story to progress. The characters, Nova and Edward, were played by some guest appearances that we had at the beginning. We didn't quite have this group that we had before as permanent, and so it was great that they were able to lend their aid in starting the story. It did go sideways as a DM. It kind of, I did not expect to have them travel to Vorak right away, but they that's where they went. The troubles that they had, or the fighting tensions, I believe was because Boston's character, or Brett's character, Boston, who had actually been to the House of Lathander before, has issues with a resident there named
Marcel, right?
Marcel, yes. And so, like, Marcel just shows up and wants to fight Boston on just arrival, just it's on site.
I remember that. That was wild.
I believe Nash just picks him up by the front and threatens him at some point.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
In all of this,
Yeah.
Marcel deserved it. To be clear,
he's kind of a spoiled brat. He did deserve it. He earned it. And there's interesting development later, but I'm going to let that slide for future recaps. But it's fun. It's great. I loved it.
wild.
Love having these little moments of conflict. And then the players bring their own things, as Nash's character before the explosion the night before just like gives us an insight to his mind and mannerisms as he like, from what I recall, like screams into his pillow before.
He in fact is feeling so many things at once. To pull the curtain back a little bit, he is a barbarian, and so he actually is so upset that he rages. Which allows him to grow a tail, which he then uses to comfort himself by hugging it. It's
a cute, tender moment.
Yep.
He's our good boy.
Our good boy Nash. Yeah.
That's his boy. Well, actually, kind of folding it back to you, Tony, would you go over episode 2, Mulligan?
Yeah, so in Mulligan, we are woken up by an explosion. Baldric has decided to sleep out in like a common area, whereas the rest of us have rooms aside. And so it's this chaotic wake up. Walls are creaking and cracking and ceilings are collapsing. Nash and Boston have to sort of go through this falling apart temple, trying to find their new friend, and try and figure out what's happened, while everyone is panicking and running to and fro, right? And then they come upon this idea that those who were after Rick in the previous episode may have been behind it. As they sort of investigate the temple, they find Baldric under a pile of rubble, and Nash and Boston work to uncover him before Boston sort of finds that Tobias, his sort of mentor figure in the Church of Lathander, has been knocked unconscious nearby and goes to work with that. So Tobias then urges Boston to find the others and clear people out of the temple. On doing so, Nash and Boston and Rick, who is, I believe, now conscious at this point, or will soon be conscious, at least, run into Fenrana. Fenrana, who was just sent over on their governmental duties and stayed the night in the Temple of the Thander, just to have it blow up on them. And so they're very confused and sort of meet up with this group and offer to help. They altogether learn of a cult targeting individuals with augmentations, and that's when they learned that Edward and Nova have died, and their mechanical parts, their augmentations, their machinery that's been integrated into their being has actually been taken out of their bodies, which is extremely rough. And the group decides that absolutely they need to investigate this cult. On their way to find a little bit more, and out at the front of the temple, they meet up with our final main cast member for this arc, Ramita, and her granddaughter, who is introduced to us as Dax, but we learn to know her as Viper. And the session sort of comes to a close with the party making plans, almost revenge-like, to go after this cult. So it is a very directed episode, but very, very interesting. There's a lot nested in there.
Yeah, there is truly so much. Like, looking back on it and rewatching it, it was absolutely intense and almost insane in the way that it has laid itself out. But it leads to some really good like motivations in the rest of this arc for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the augmentations that the characters had, like Nova had new hands all the way up to the elbow, and then I think Edward was mostly cyborg, like 80%, like his legs, his hips, his shoulder, his arm, part of his torso. So like his was the most brutal. So yeah, and the crew being polite as they were carried the bodies outside where they had a sort of a memorial pre the uh, burial. Because there were others that had fallen as well, and it was mayhem, and I loved it.
Yeah. And to kind of go into the next one, episode 3 is titled Stranger Danger. The party was really pumped up after getting some food at a cafe and kind of just reinvigorating themselves. They learn of a festival taking place in the town. So Ramita, Rick, and Nash and Boston explore the festivals and check out the booths and what's going on there. Specifically, there's also a kissing booth featuring an automaton without lips. Is an important point there. Nash then convinced Rick to participate in the festival, not the kissing booth, and they engaged in activities there and kind of helped distract themselves from what was going on in the previous episode to kind of mellow themselves out. But meanwhile, Fen and the group noticed a suspicious individual trying to offer healing, but ended up thwarting a robbery. They later discovered a child named Trixie, who leads them to the Church of the Dawn, the secret organization. After the party decides to investigate the church, discovering its business-like structure, electronically charged pews, and numerous arcane orbs. After a break, they discuss their findings and receive messages from Father Tobias, prompting them to head back to the tented base of operations where the church had been bombed, and to plan their next moves, including infiltrating this Church of the John later that night.
Yeah, this episode was super fun to play with because right, the kid who tries to offer healing is doing magic tricks for people, right?
Yeah.
But because this world is run right, it is a cyberpunk world. We each have sim chips somewhere in our body, right? Your wrist, your whatever, right? You can, if people aren't watching, steal their money from their sim chip, which is what this kid tried to do to our party. Actually, is they tried to rob us. But we're too wise. Also, we're probably hyped up on adrenaline from being bombed recently. So,
I remember that being a point where like you guys were all like, I'm checking all of my surroundings. I know where all exits are. I need a perception check. I need to see if this person's intentions are good. I remember that being a very heavy point in this festival when you guys were playing.
Yeah.
And
point of note, the festival was a spontaneous fundraiser organized by the church and the people around to help raise money for repairs to the church. As a lot of the people who work at the church live there, like as a monastery kind of thing. They were in the restaurant and they were talking, and of course they made plans, and they all as a group got up and went outside and started making preparations. And that afternoon they had like a fundraiser type festival, and everyone, all the town was getting together. It was a interesting way to help give the players a way to begin their quests and come up with different routes of like how are we gonna do this.
Yeah. And to kind of lead in from there, that leads us to episode 4, the best laid plans. Gears, you want to kick that off?
Sure, yeah. The party discusses their plan for infiltrating church at the Church of the Dawn, which is supposed to be a type of like copy of Lathander, but so people were like, "Oh, Church of the Dawn, we know it." They don't. It's a new one, but you know how people do. They try to make it similar enough that you feel familiar with it. Nash decides to disguise himself using makeup and has a huge drag moment that actually convinces one of the characters that it's. I think it was Boston who was actually convinced that was not Nash. It was like, hey, what'd you do with Nash?
I will say it officially wasn't drag, but it was just really good makeup.
Well, yeah. I imagine it sort of as drag, but it was convincing. That's what it was.
There is, I think, some parts to drag that are very, very important that Nash was not.
Did not do. Yeah, I'm
so,
sure it was just camouflage. It was a very good camouflage for sure.
yeah.
Tobias contacts Boston about the video showing 4 men, a type of security cam. It's like an orb that just records like a 360, but also lights up as a type of lamp. So it's a 2-part. It's really cool. And just shows the 4 men going into the room that Nova and Edward were sleeping in, as they are step siblings as well. The party disguised at the church. They witness a sermon. Oh, they go to a different church. The one where the child leads them to, the one that they were at the festival previously, leads them to a separate church. And
that's the Church of Dawn, though, isn't it?
Yes, the Church of Dawn. In a sort of business office district area. And where they see the children chant and absorb energy from the glowing chairs that they're in. They speak with a man named John and a priest. The group investigates further after the sermon, discovering a magical door behind a curtain emitting energy. Nash gathers information, and Boston and Rick confront the priest about various things. Fenn explores the wall behind the podium and finds a teleportation circle leading to a warehouse. And upon trying to go into the warehouse, they set the chapel on fire. The building was empty. The priest and the other attendee were gone at this point, but still, Baldric decided fire at this point. Was just kind of like, okay, we're going to set everything on blaze. Yeah. And then they find themselves teleported to a factory with aisles and aisles of empty shelving, abandoned. But an alarm is sound off, and the fire continues. They set this place on fire as well, and make a hasty exit as some racks fall on some individuals, claiming the very first lives of this campaign, instigated by Fenrana. And then they return to their hotel that they're staying in, while Boston keeps watch for the night.
Yeah. Wow.
That is insane. Yeah. It was definitely one heck of an episode, for sure.
It was. I believe during this, this is where we find the pool that eats magical items, right? Like it turns magical items into goo.
Yeah.
And that kind of is, as I understand it, part of what actually energizes the kids in the church. That's how they pump stuff into the kids, is from that magical goo. And Rick actually puts a finger in it, and it dissolves a finger.
Yeah. It dissolved his finger.
He's Warforged, so like we knew that was a chance, and he's like, that's fine, right? So not the biggest deal, but somebody lost a finger, and it's episode 4.
4, yeah.
4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was looking at the next one.
Yeah, no, you're good.
I didn't mean to throw you. But yeah, it's episode 4, and somebody loses a finger, and a building gets burnt.
And kind of to segue into episode 5, titled Afterburn.
I wonder where he came up with that name.
Yeah.
That one's a mystery. Yeah, so they sort of have they all come back sort of separately to the hotels, right? And the night goes quiet. And it's a weirdly quiet morning afterwards. So like you have these the group kind of gets together for breakfast, and Boston watches the news and learns that not only was the place we sat on fire, but it turns out multiple locations, including factories and churches, were set on fire throughout the night. and this has sparked a debate about whether or not there's a war on religion and some other things going on in the area. I will say, if you watch the episode, you will know that a portion of those, at the minimum, were Baldric. So Baldric may have started conversation about a war on religion. So that's very interesting. Ramita has a dream of her grandchild Viper, right? That we mentioned. And Fen has a mysterious dream about a beach. And so we start getting into this a little bit of Kalashtar stuff there, where Ramita is, or sorry, Fen is starting to have weird dreams and maybe even prophetic dreams. We don't really know if it has any meaning or not. And Nash is super fidgety as always, so Nash gets up super early to get a workout in before everybody has breakfast. And then they kind of head to one of the rooms, right? Fen's room in the hotel, because they each have their own rooms, and learn about this acid with the ability to sort of eat magic and interact with organic matter in this weird way, and decide, okay, we've got to look much further into this. And so they return to the scene of the crime, which is maybe not the best decision, to find that there are barricades set up, and there's even more mysterious scorch marks, which is an interesting thing, because you don't really think of mysterious scorch marks after a fire. You would think that they're all just normal scorch marks, right? So they gather more information about the church while there, and Ramita and Fen actually go to a local deli to sort of check it out. They've heard some weird stuff there. Ramita recognizes a familiar bus with, I believe it has Church of Dawn markings, and decides to investigate. While talking with the driver, she decides to bull rush on board, and the bus takes off because somebody is trying to get on board who shouldn't be on board, leaving Fen behind and Ramita kidnapped, basically. On the other side of town, Boston, Rick, and Nash stake out the factory, and Rick gets kidnapped. So Boston and Nash have to... So basically, in an episode, two of us are separately kidnapped.
Which reminds everyone, don't split the party.
I was just about to say that.
They had split the party. Two of them went to the Dawn church that had been burnt, and then the other three went to the warehouse that they had found themselves teleported to. And yeah, they
I hear you about don't splitting the party. It is the most efficient way to gather information. It is, in fact.
It is. It really is. They learned a lot in that episode.
There's a saying of don't split the party, but in my years, I find that a lot of people miss out on stuff because they're so focused in on we're together.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you just got to get kidnapped, I guess, is
exactly
the thing here.
I mean, really immerse yourself in the situations, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And that also leads to the next episode, which, where's a car? Because Fen is left at the deli, which is across the street from the Church of Dawn, without Ramita and without transportation, needing to get to the other half of the group, be like, regroup, be like, hey, Ramita's on the bus. She went, I don't know, she went somewhere. She thought she saw something. And they're like, yeah, we don't have Rick. And they're like, what happened to Rick? He got kidnapped by some local, what turned out to be squatters, and some kids that were part of the squatter group. And he cleverly talked his way out of it, I believe. But they were hoping to have their own little butler, to help with the chores and the cleanup. And they're like, "You're ours now." but that failed. He escaped that, and they actually found out that the bus that had left the Church of the Dawn, leaving Fen behind with Ramita in the inside, had actually found its way to the warehouse where the other guys were. So they were like, oh wow, that's the bus. Does it look like this? And Fen's like, absolutely, because they have a little comm that they talk to each other with. So Fen is like, I need a car. I need to get to you guys. And then I think they found a rental, or it was Baldric that found a rental or something like that. But they all kind of eventually get back to the warehouse.
Yeah.
And then, it's just kind of like a huge where is this and where is that trying to get together kind of episode.
Yeah, which does lead into episode 7, called Harpoon, where concerns about Fen's safety arise from this whole kind of debacle that ended up happening. And so they go retrieve Fen and explain, what happened. Like everyone kind of gets each other's side of whatever part of the situation they were on. And then they plan to go back to the Church of the Dawn and to drop off the vehicle and get some more supplies. And to which they ask Fen to contact someone regarding a bloody handkerchief for some more evidence retrieval. They then receive the message from their former professor, catching them up and indicating that the magic eating acid locations are known, but the party can't get to any of them, as it would be could be copying a past cult that was in the histories of this town, from which the professor did grant permission for them to contact the local authorities. And in that time, it reminds Boston to deputize Nash. So now he is a cowboy himself. Boston and Rick then drop off the car that they got and go shopping to get more of those supplies, then discuss recent happenings, including the prices rising due to these robberies and explosions, probably to compensate for what was lost in those. Fen called their professor again and learned about the cult's use of magic to accelerate the growth in individuals, specifically the children in this cult, which prepare them for potential brainwashing as they grow into adulthood at this accelerated rate. I believe in the campaign, it was over the course of a couple of days, a child went from 5 years old to 17, which was absolutely insane. Then with that, Rick gathered more intel while Ramita had some girly time with the waitresses, and Boston received a message from Father Tobias hinting at a possible location for this cult.
Yeah,
that was hilarious.
The girly time was a blast, and this is where we delved into more of Ramita being a grandma and her love of butterscotch candies and things like that. Mm-hmm. One of the things we missed in the last episode, and we sort of hinted about here, is that we actually caught the bus at the Church of the Dawn. So what Nash actually ended up being able to catch up and have this Jackie Chan sort of action movie montage moment of clawing his way up the side of the bus, jumping in and fighting one of the cultists, which is part of how they learned that this aging happened, because Nash was confronted by somebody who used to be a kid literally a day before, maybe 2 days before. Trixie, the 6-year-old, I believe, that we'd met, was now like 15, 16 and driving the bus. And so he does try to convince her to come along. And she basically says, no, you're not the boss of me. And also, I don't trust strangers, which is something you told me in an earlier episode. So that does kind of change some of like how we approach this episode 7, is we succeeded, but not really before this. And so that's kind of an interesting bit to add to it.
Yeah, I love the part because Nash went to go and grab the bus, and then at the last second grew claws, which like, you know, Predator like went into the sides and then jumped over the roof and found the exit, the former exit, you know, up on top, and just ripped that off. And they had a close encounter, trying to get Ramita back, and then realizing that was Trixie. Maybe convince her to get off. So yeah, that was fun. An interesting little combat that I had not anticipated either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But that kind of leads into session 8 of like burning bridges.
We have this really big theme in this arc about fire. And it's starting to sink in more to me as we look back in these episodes. This episode starts with Boston, and a good member, a couple of the party, I believe, being concerned because Fen had basically couldn't do anything when Ramita is kidnapped. And we do have her back. That is another thing that from the bus that we do get Ramita back. But Fen wasn't terribly able to help, and so Boston especially is worried about that. And so, you know, several members of the party are worried about their safety as we're delving into this cult and obviously very dangerous people. Ramita is still being pampered by the waitress. I believe they go get pedicures, if I remember correctly. It's something like that.
Yeah, she's kidnapped at some point by the waitresses because she's just so friendly and so, you know, approachable as a grandma.
Nice kidnapped, not actual kidnapped. I feel like we've used the word kidnapped a lot here, and we gotta specify.
That's true. That's true.
Right? It's more like, come
aggressively
on,
recruited.
Yeah. And so Nash actually has to go and save them. Save Ramita from this group of ladies, because Ramita is kind of uncomfy because they don't really like being pampered as much as a lot of folks do. Nash actually reaches out or hears back finally from his contact Spider, who is somebody he met in prison and is kind of an information broker. And he's asked him to keep an eye open for a drug that's being put out, and an aging drug and that sort of thing. It ties into the cult, right? The party then, once they're all back together, decides to head to police headquarters because that's the smartest thing when you've been an arsonist and been fighting, you know, people that look like Sunday school teachers, is to go and ally yourselves with the police, I believe. But we decided to do it. And inside, partially because Fen, being a governmental person, has some really interesting bureaucratic pull, and is able to work with the police. So Fen approaches them and is able to speak with an inspector that, ironically, we did as a group get to, I believe, named Jiff Links. They sort of info dump about the cult and the new church, and a little bit about Tobias. And Boston and Fen sort of have a butting of the heads. And I believe this is Boston ends up punching a wall.
I do believe I recall that, yes.
I think it was like a cemented flower vase that you find outside in the front of like government buildings and whatnot. But yeah, it was definitely, because it wasn't in front of the police officer that he punches a governmental building.
Anyway, he ends up putting out his frustration on an inanimate object that hurts his hand more than he hurts it, right? And so the party ends up going to a bar. We're just like, it's been a wild couple of days. Let's just go have a few drinks and chill out. And that's sort of where we close out that episode, is some bonding time after butting heads. And, you know, everyone getting, not everyone, Nash has not been kidnapped at this point, and Fen hasn't been kidnapped. Ramita kidnapped twice, and kidnapped
I believe this episode is also where Rick, who was there for the meeting when Ramita was whisked away by the waitresses, left to go do his own thing. And when returned, he was now a Warforged who previously did not have a jaw, now has a jaw, no total makeover, and then also shows up with his Rickmobile.
Yeah.
At the party where they are drinking and having food.
We intermittently will call it the Rickmobile, or my favorite, the Rick Rolls-Royce.
And actually, speaking of that, that does lead into session 9, gearing up. Gears, kind of as your namesake, would you like to go over this episode?
Very appropriate, yes. So as they return to the hotel in the Rick Rolls-Royce, such a mouthful, Boston invites Nash for a run or a night walk, just to burn off some of the calories that they acquired at the dinner drinking beforehand. But they end up going to having a specific destination, as Boston wants to confront Tobias about his potential involvement with this cult, as he questions if this cult is actually part of Lathander, because they were found at the church. They were inside. They kind of mimic a lot of the Lathander iconography and whatnot. But they couldn't find him. They couldn't get a hold of him. They settled for Marcel, of which they got some information. And they return to the cult, or to the hotel where the rest of the crew is at, and Ramita playfully hits Boston and Nash with water balloons on their return. They armor up the car and decide to go shopping for weapons. Boston gives Nash heading to the church. They find tarps gone and working people. The church is already under construction and under way back to getting repaired, as the church moves fast. Construction is underway, and they meet up with Tobias, who introduces them to Danielle, who explains that they were a member of the cult that they are chasing. They were a child that had grown rather quickly and developed some abilities, not like the ones that were of the child that they had met, Trixie, who was doing healing. Hers ended up being precognition, and she was able to tell them where the cult's headquarters actually was, besides the church that had previously gotten burned down. So they decide now is a good time to infiltrate, attack, and get all of their help and aid together. So that is the prep for what's to come, and is their first dungeon crawl.
Yeah, this episode is a lot of fun because it's really the build up, right? Like it is. I mean, there's been a lot of setting the scene and getting us to a good space for the end of this arc, and then this is sort of the ramp up of like, all right, are you ready? Are you ready? Because we're about to get going. And the next couple of episodes are just, tying knots in things and figuring out where pathways lead. And it's really cool.
Kind of speaking of that, session 10 is titled It's a Trap. The group explores an old elementary school, finding it in a decrepit state with mold and rust. After one part of the team cracks a locked door and deals with the trap, another part discovers... I'm so sorry, I'm going to cut off real quick. Tony, can you hear them in the background? On Streamlabs? Okay, cool.
No,
I'm going to start over from the top.
Yeah,
I'll start from the top. I just she started talking as soon as I started talking. Sorry about that, future Tony. All right. The group explores an old elementary school, finding it in a decrepit state with mold and rust. Just an absolute, kind of trash building that they're in. Very sets the scene. After one part of the team cracks a locked door and deals with a trap, another part discovers a damaged gymnasium with a tree branch and a bird's nest. just kind of and like highlighting how old and decrepit this building is. The party regroups and they enter a locker room and proceed to a metallic humming hallway. Spotting a drone, they hide in a sewing room using Rick's illusion to avoid detection. Moving towards the library, further into this building, they encounter flood damage and decide to point the drone to confuse it. When their plan fails, a battle ensues, with Rick securing the finishing blow, which I think this was like one of the first official battles in this campaign.
Yeah, it was. I think we had a couple of small skirmishes. Things like the fight on the bus, where it was almost one-on-one. But there weren't a ton of real combats. And we came in on fire to this one. I'm honestly very proud of the group. I'm specifically proud of Nash.
Not to toot your own horn or anything.
Well, so Nash's idea was to put the paint on top of the drone because you can't, it's really hard to wipe paint off of lenses, so it's really going to get smeary and difficult. And then Nash knew that Nash is used to getting hit, right? So in fighting this, Nash was really just like up in its face, like, come at me, bro, come at me, so that everybody else could do a ton of walloping to it, and just really trying to like be the attention, right? And so that was a really fun way of approaching combat, and I enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, and honestly, like it was really cool to watch how you guys like really learned your group dynamic and work together to make it work for you in the setting that you're unfamiliar with and is very different than what you're used to. But after that combat, Fenn investigated a clean door, discovering a lounge beyond it. As the sheriff's squad approached, they found orbs and paintings that triggered a mechanism locking the door behind them. Gears, if you want to expand on what that happened.
That was my first puzzle for this group to try and solve. So that was rather difficult. They had to, it was... trying to get them to do the searching and investigating and putting the puzzle together and keeping track of symbols that they had to, one of them which was a false symbol, and then of course Ramita being at the perfect height, being the child's, the halfling, at child height, being able to see the answer to the puzzle, so that they could get out before they were like, I don't remember if I had the walls coming in to crush them or if the whole room was going to just electrify them or something. But, that was their first, challenge of pressured, how do we get out of this without actually fighting anything? The bird's nest, however, was an option to go around that puzzle, but it was going to actually be a griffin's nest, and they would have to fight some griffins. So it was, one way or the other, and they had to do something.
Yeah, and that actually leads us into a majority of session 11, This Isn't Fine class. If you want to kind of expand on that and how it worked in that session, Gears.
Yeah, sure. They do, there are orbs that light up depending on where you put, the orbs had to be moved into different sections where the symbols highlighted, and depending on where they were, they either lit up like orange or red or green, and they were just like, okay, what do we do? And Baldric was actually going to go through all of the different possible combinations, to try and get it solved before Ramita was like, oh, here's the answer. But they also tried to, I think, wedge open a door using Ramita's hammer at one point. And she does a really cool, like, jump up the wall and tries to jump onto the hammer, trying to, like, push it open. Just does not move. But once they're out, they manage to make their way to the other end of the school, finds the room where there are, cult children-ish people, and the other room where there's a set of like rows of large coffin-sized pods, and two of them had children in there. One, Billy John and Sally Mae, I think, or something like that, who revealed that they're siblings, and Rick both notices that these are the kids that were part of his kidnap earlier, but also is able to contact the police, letting them know where they're at, and getting them to where they are. There's a little negotiation, a little talking with the kids after they've defeated them. Yeah.
All right. And Nash, any thoughts that you have on, how that went down and everything that you guys had to endure?
It's this was a moment for Nash, very much of Nash is not the puzzle guy. I don't know if you've noticed. Nash is not the puzzle guy. So this was a lot of Nash getting sort of like roped up and being like, I would love to solve this. I have no clue what's going on. But trying to help his friends however possible. I don't remember him being super effective at that. But it was just another sort of moment in being like, oh crap, this is another weak spot we've got. Great, cool, love that. Growing a lot. This is fine. So, we did finding the kids sort of, Billy John and Sally at the end was a really good sort of sweet note to end on. Getting to sort of whomp somebody a little bit was very fun. But this episode sort of was a kind of cool start to the resolution that we find in session 12. So session 12, you can say the title of it two ways. With the way we wrote it originally was sort of cyberpunky and stylized, where it's dm.exe not found. But you could say DM not found, right? And part of that is a reference to something that happens in this episode where we sort of, I believe through jokes and our bits, just full stop gears and as a gaff, I believe we have to take a break for them to get themselves back together and for us to continue, where we full halted them, and
Full
so
blue screen, just kind of like, oh, I'm done with this.
Right. We thought that was very funny, and so we named the episode after it instead of, a useful title that's probably helpful for the people who are watching this episode.
Welcome to Dungeons and Dragons, friends.
Right.
Welcome to specifically Breaking Character. We're here for the bit, but we're also here to tell you a story, right? So as we kind of get into this chamber with pods and tubes and kids in various stage of growth, right? Like they're all shoved in at 6 and they're 15, 13, wherever, right? The group sort of starts an interrogation with a low-ranking member of the cult named Andrew. Andrew provides information about a cult leader named Scully, the head of operations, and Scully's boss called the Animator. Which is a spooky title. And he reveals that the kids were brought in here for a higher purpose, and also gives us a list of who actually those kids were, which is very helpful when you're dealing with the cops, so we can get the kids to their rightful homes. So thank you, Andrew. Sorry for beating you in the face a couple of times. Not really sorry.
I think he was also like shot in the knee or something. I forget.
Yeah, he was probably brutalized a little bit. We were not gentle.
No.
Meanwhile, so while this is going on, the group is learning a lot about Andrew. They're interrogating. Fen and Nash have a moment where they like play hopscotch with some of the little kids and play around with kids and keep them distracted, because especially if you're interrogating some guy in the next room, you really don't want kids seeing that. And so Fen and Nash open up their inner inner kid and really keep the kids entertained and distracted. The police arrive, and Tobias comes with them. Boston gives him an update on the situation. Rick, of course, called the police. And so the police start moving out the bodies and start corralling the kids that Fen brings to them. At that point is when Nash notices that our informant Danielle um, disappeared. And so he actually goes on a bit of a hunt and tracks her to a neighborhood that has sort of a low traffic area with 3 vehicles on the street, and starts trying to, like, that's where she sort of vanishes. And he starts trying to figure out where she is, and talking to people on the street and doing some of that stuff, which a large, very sweaty, slightly blood covered man asking about a kid is usually probably not well received. So you can imagine how well that scene goes. And Fenn, back at sort of the base camp, learns from a member of the cult that Trixie and Danielle actually had these unique abilities. We learned a little bit before, but it's reinforced some more here, and we learn more information about their abilities. And Nash, the episode sort of ends with Nash in an awkward conversation with a confused driver, and then he sort of dives into a local convenience store. This is, I believe, it's either at the end of this episode or the beginning of this episode that Nash dreams up the Bodega Street Team. That becomes a big part. It's a little part, but a big part of our crew, because that's sort of the name that sticks internally. And his idea was like, okay, I'm a large, sweaty, blood-covered man. What if I convince people I'm part of a promotional team to save the bodega? That's an important part of this neighborhood, I'm sure. So he starts, being basically a local, hype man for the bodega.
Yeah.
Bodega.
Yep. And he says bodega like 87 times. It's great.
So many times, yes.
So that's where this kind of arc closes, is we have found the kids, but there are other mysteries that are opening themselves to us.
Yeah, because I believe during the battle, one of the cultists got away. And so that left things hanging as to, where did he go? What, who do we have to chase now? And then, Danielle running off, unexpectedly, kind of wanted to know, where she went, why did she leave, or did she leave on her own accord? Did somebody take her while we were in the, combat or something? All these questions. But at the very least, they were able to save a couple of kids and resolve, what happened to the other kids. Because I also had, throughout these episodes, sprinkled, there was a time where they saw 8 kids get loaded onto a bus and the bus disappeared. And they wanted to know what happened to those 8 kids, and they find out that at the end that they were actually kind of maybe fighting those kids in this elementary school. But they were they're teens now. And the stages of growth were kind of varied in the area, because without actually giving ages, it's all based on appearance. So somebody who is 7 might appear to be 5, or somebody who's 10 might appear to be 13. The growth is questionable, but it is still apparent that it's okay, you're not as young as you used to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I will say, because that sort of us fighting what used to be kids is brought up, we did, in fact, during the fight, use, I believe, entirely non-lethal force. So we were
absolutely,
weren't gentle, because they were keeping other kids locked up. We also weren't lethal. And we very well could have been.
Yeah, I believe everyone in that fight was knocked out or interrogated afterwards. And then, taken into questioning. No one lost a life in that one, I believe.
Correct.
Yeah, and if you want to find out more specifics, you can absolutely feel free to watch any of these episodes that we've listed and talked about here. We highly encourage you to do so, in fact. But otherwise, this has been an amazing recap. I really love that we've been able to go a little more in depth on these. This has been really fun. But otherwise, thank you again, Tony and Gears, for joining me on this. Is there anything that you guys want to let the audience know? I guess we'll start with you, Gears.
Just I don't know, just stay tuned and go through these recaps, and I hope you guys catch up to our current episodes because those are getting really good.
There's a lot in store.
Yeah,
and then pass it to Tony.
Absolutely. So what I would add is I can't wait for you to learn more and join us on our live streams over on Twitch, because that's where we're actively playing these new games, and we'll catch up the YouTube, but if you're here, you're trying to catch up there, right? So we love for you to join us there, but also. We have a few more shows on the channel, right? I run the One Shot Wonderarium, so you can check that out. We do one shots every week, so if you're not caught up with Breaking Character, but you still want something to watch and maybe need a break from that, come check out some of that stuff. You can find me on TikTok at Tony Will Edit, and come over and say hi. But outside of that, I just can't wait to see y'all. It's going to be great.
Yeah. Yes, and another show that we have on Roll for Respawn as a channel on Thursdays, we have Thirsty Gate Thursdays, where me, Rev, Gears, and Blood are currently playing Baldur's Gate 3 as a party, and we will eventually start playing other games together as queerly as possible.
Or as sexually as possible.
Exactly. And so otherwise, as well, I am the host, Bright. I am exclusively here on Roll for Respawn. I help host these Role for Recaps for now, and also on Thursday and Wonderariums as well. But otherwise, thank you again so much for tuning in. We really appreciate you watching, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye.
See you later.